From Eyewitness News, this is Newsmakers.
It's been one bad headline after another for Rhode Island cities. Just this week, Providence's bond rating was cut again, and Woonsocket is prepared to slap residents with a 13% supplemental tax bill. Governor Lincoln Chafee says he has the solution, a sweeping package of legislation that would cut public workers' benefits and beef up oversight of municipal finances. But is it enough, and does a governor with sagging approval ratings have the clout to make it happen? This week on Newsmakers, our guest, Rhode Island Governor Lincoln Chafee. Good morning. Welcome to Newsmakers. I'm Tim White. Joining me on the panel, WPRI.com reporter Ted Nisi and Eyewitness News analyst Arlene Violet. Good morning, everyone.
Good morning, Tim.
Good morning, Governor.
Good morning, Tim.
Thank you for joining us on the program. I know you have a lot on your plate, so we appreciate it. And before we dive in to troubled cities and towns, I do want to ask you about a story that has been dominating the headlines. I'd like your reaction to the drunk driving arrest of Senate Majority Leader Dominic Ruggiero.
Well, of course, this is very regrettable because of all the challenges we have in this state. But from what I understand, he took full responsibility for his actions, and now we move forward and get back to the business of getting our economy going and people back to work, and that's really what we want to focus on.
And you have every confidence, as does Senate President Teresa Paiva-Weed, that this will not affect him as the Majority Leader?
I'm sure he'll deal with it as he did at the time of the incident as the best way possible can, but I know we're going to focus on the task at hand, and that's enormous, as we all know, getting our economy going.
Let's jump right to the task at hand, the cities and towns. Tim talked about it in the opening segment. I was there when you unveiled your package. It's far-reaching. It includes a host of things from school bus monitors to changes in pension benefits, all sorts of things the mayors have been asking for. But I have to ask, a lot of what you hear right now is, well, Governor Chafee has some good ideas, but it seems like the Assembly doesn't listen to him with the sales tax overhaul, with the MAST fund, with gay marriage, with the local pensions in November. Why will this time be different? How do you convince the General Assembly to take a tough vote on these measures when they didn't seem to want to last year when you were encouraging them?
Well, as we saw with the pension reform of the fall, sometimes it has to be a sense of urgency. And hopefully now, as we let off the show here with what's happening in Woonsocket and with Providence with the bond rating, and those two communities really being on the brink of bankruptcy, that there's a sense of urgency. And the General Assembly really has to understand there's three choices. We can either accept my legislative package and take action, or if there's some other form of action, I'm open to that, but take action, or we can let the communities go into bankruptcy, or we can let them raise property taxes up, which stifle economic growth and just hammer the homeowners and businesses. Those are our three choices.
In
take
the fall,
action,
there was actually, though, a campaign.
Bankruptcy, or rising property taxes.
In the fall, that pension reform, though, had a really strong campaign, constant, grabbing the collar of legislators, etc. Do you have a campaign going like that? Are you up every day or calling legislators into the State House to make sure they understand how critical this package is to pass?
Yes, I'm meeting with town council people and urging them. The key is to get their legislators to support it. Been around to various cities and towns, Portsmouth, North Kingstown, speaking with the managers. We're having a meeting Monday.
How about the legislators? Have you called them in?
Preaching to the choir in many ways, Governor?
Yeah.
You're a face at Woonsocket
Tim,
Town Council.
I've been talking about this for a year. When I first took office, I've been talking about the cities and towns since I took the first day in office, and every opportunity with the various senators and reps.
Are you meeting with the individual legislators?
And I welcome the press's involvement.
Yeah.
How about a full-court press?
Are you meeting with individual legislators to make your case?
The key of the
How
leaders.
many of them have you met with so far?
I meet with Teresa Paiva-Weed and Gordon Fox every week.
But I mean individual people.
We
people
were
that
at
might be
Alpine
on
Country Club with various legislators talking about small businesses on Tuesday, I believe. So
but how about the legislation? Do you, in the old days, people would call in the legislators and say, look, I really want this to pass. Have you been buttonholing them on an individual basis, not just the leaders?
What more can I say, Arlene, than every day this has been a priority for the administration? You know that. I've been talking about it since the campaign, even before taking office. The cities and
I was
towns
asking you about
just
steps, not just theory, though. It is a priority, but I'm asking you, did you actually take all those steps to get legislators, and have you talked to them individually, telling them, well, you've got to do this?
When I ran for office, the reason I ran for office to make Rhode Island better. And I believe that one of the ways to make Rhode Island better is to address our cities and towns. We cannot have these communities going to bankruptcy. That's why I'm in office. So I'm doing everything possible in urging the legislators, House and Senate. House is pretty good. Senate's a little tougher, I'll say. They're more resistant to any involvement of the governor. And that's from past experience that they've had with previous governors. And I'm working hard to improve that relationship.
You talked about the
Because it's
pension.
important for the health of our state, the future of our state.
You talked about the pension reform bill that your name was on, but a big proponent of that was, of course, General Treasurer Gina Raimondo. Why is it that she hasn't come out in support of your municipal relief legislation?
I'm sure she will, because the sense of urgency, as it was with pension reform and what we had to contribute in the state budget, from going from 80 million to 150 million to 300 million, that's what we had to put in. That was the sense of urgency. So now, as we see Woonsocket in the paper, Providence, bond rating on the verge of bankruptcy, there's a sense of urgency, and every Rhode Island
She
should
told
be
the Journal
supporting.
that her office was not consulted. Is that accurate?
Well, we worked all through the fall on municipal issues, all through the summer and fall, and without success of getting buy-in. So now the effort is on the legislature.
Labor leaders compared some of your ideas.
Certainly
here.
welcome everybody's support, whether it's Attorney General, General Treasurer, Secretary of State, Lieutenant Governor, media. It's
Dog
really
catcher, anybody will come out for
the future of the state's
well,
what's important.
Well, that's, you know, and some of the labor leaders compared this to Wisconsin and Scott Walker. Obviously, I know you pride yourself on not being that sort of governor who leads to these massive protests and fights. But you know, you came in with the support of some unions, and there are things in here they hate, things binding arbitration, changes to the pension benefits in the local plans. You know, why? Why have you decided this is necessary now?
I'm consistent in my policies. I have been since a councilman, a mayor, a U.S. senator. Sometimes the unions support my policies, sometimes they don't. But I like to look at what's best for my community, whether it's when I was a senator, the nation, or as a mayor, my city, and now as a governor of the state. And that's all I care about. And I work with unions, I always have, but when I think something's best for my community, that's what I'll proceed and advocate for. And if the unions are on my side, that's good. And if they're not, I'll work with them to try and get them on my side.
You've been quoted as saying that Woonsocket and Providence shouldn't fall into bankruptcy. The state cannot let that happen. Do you feel that an unintended consequence, however, of that statement is that employees and retirees really won't get serious about any type of concessions because you've assured them that this is something that the state would bail them out of rather than have them go into bankruptcy?
No, in fact, what you're saying is the legislature's reluctant to buy into this legislative package. I think they're thinking then the other option is bankruptcy. And so it would be up to, I would advocate that they contact their legislature, say it's better for us to all be involved in this and avoid bankruptcy.
Isn't it a cheap sentiment, though, to say the state should bail out up to 4 municipalities? Because we don't even have the resources as a state potentially to address those issues.
No, you really have to go back, Arlene, as to how we got into this pickle. And how we got into it was deep, deep cuts in state aid to cities and towns. Other states took other ways out of the recession. What Rhode Island did when the revenues were declining in the crash of the economy is we put it on the cities and towns, $200 million taken away from the communities, and it fell disproportionately on those that could least afford it. Woonsocket, West Warwick, Providence, Pawtucket, Central Falls, those are the communities that get state aid. It was absolutely backwards. We're going to hammer the poorest communities. East Greenwich, Barrington, Middletown, Lincoln, they don't get much state aid. It didn't affect them. It fell on the poorest communities. And now we're trying to take action. So you're saying this is not right for the state to get involved. It's our fault that they're having these fiscal problems.
Well, it's not like the state, as Ted Nesi has written about, you know, decided let's just cut this. The state has been in a recession for years, earlier than the national one. And Ted, your recent article talked about how we're not getting out of it.
We're not recovering in Rhode Island in a lot of ways. I want to ask you.
So other states look at what they did in the recession. Massachusetts addressed the sales tax side. That's what they did. And you don't read about any bankruptcies in cities and towns in Massachusetts. We pushed it right down without any relief in the mandate. So now my program is twofold. We'll help you on the revenue side but we'll also relieve you of some of the onerous mandates and,
but
and
wasn't
allow you to take off the handcuffs and make reforms.
Wasn't Governor Kucheri in many ways right about that? I mean, you hammer him for cutting aid to cities and towns. You just talked about it 20 seconds ago. But it was a General Assembly who passed those cuts, but did not pass many of the getting rid of the mandates that even you're looking to pass in the package of legislation. So in many ways, wasn't he right?
You might argue that, but it was pretty predictable what the General Assembly would do. They'd take the cuts away, take the money away from the cities and towns and not pass the reforms. That was pretty predictable at the time, and that's what happened.
Then why isn't your venom aimed at the General Assembly at that time, and it's always at Governor Don Kucheri?
I just said the previous administration, whether that's, I don't use names, but that's, it takes both the General Assembly and the governor under previous administrations.
Some people might not understand, understandably, because it's complicated, that it is up to you in the end whether Providence gets a receiver and then files for bankruptcy, because only a receiver can do that. Why haven't you put Providence into receivership, perhaps made Mayor Taveras the receiver, so that we could sort of end this festering sore and give him more tools right now, tomorrow? You could do it, you could leave the show and do it right now.
Yes, we're certainly aware of that option, but right now we're working with them without taking those steps. But we're certainly aware of it.
If he asked you, would you?
If he asked us, yeah, that's different. He can under the law, and he hasn't yet.
Okay.
Aren't these places technically in bankruptcy for years? I mean, when you look at what bankruptcy means, their revenues aren't meeting their expenses. There have been all sorts of gadgets. It's been a chronic problem for years, not just because of the state cuts, but because of the giveaway contract. So, I mean, isn't it time either to bite the bullet, either pass these and remove the mandates, or receivership's the only option?
Yes, we're a strong labor state, and some of these state laws have been very hard on cities and towns, but I would argue the real crisis didn't occur until we had these massive cuts. I mean, $200 million over 4 years, and disproportionately falling on the poorest communities. And oftentimes, the charter of these communities have to have a budget by April or May or June at the latest, and they don't know their state aid until they've passed their budgets and sent out their property tax bills, and then they find out. They doubled the cuts in state aid. They took away even double what I expected. Now I'm behind the 8 ball. I've already sent out my property tax. I've already set a budget. That happens very, very frequently. We don't know at the local level what our state aid's going to be. And when the cuts were coming, never knew how deep they were going to be. And that's how we got into this crisis.
Governor, following
it really
up,
happened more recently, but we've all had a long history of strong labor laws that, particularly in public safety, are very tough on mayors and town managers. You should have Mayor Fontaine in here on the show and hear about some of the difficulties, or Mayor Grabian and Mayor Avedisian, Mayor Taveras, and town managers. Hear about the plight of the cities and towns firsthand.
You don't sound like a viewer of Newsmakers right now, Governor.
Yeah, we're a little upset.
Just following up on Ted's question here, talking about Providence, there is a bill out there, not yours, that would allow cities and towns to charge tax exempts like colleges and hospitals up to 25% of the value of property taxes. Do you support or oppose that legislation?
Once you start talking about nonprofits, I mean, where does that go? Are you going to be selective? Is that churches and every nonprofit? Are you going to be selective? So I'd be very careful about that.
Doesn't sound like you have strong support for it.
I'm going to be very careful about that, and especially when it affects tuitions at Johnson & Wales and our other institutions. We want to just not pass on our plate to other institutions. It's just going to pass on to the students and make higher education unaffordable.
We have to go to break, but before we do, a memorial service is set for Monday for National Guard Sergeant Dennis Weichel. We're learning he was killed when he was struck by an armored vehicle just after moving an Afghan girl to safety. Have you spoken to the family?
Yes, I have. I've called the members of the family, and tomorrow the body will be coming home, and I'll be there to greet the body home. It's a sad, sad event, but heroic actions by the sergeant.
And what did you say to the family, if you don't mind sharing?
I just offered condolence, and anything the state can do at this difficult time, stand by and ready to help in any way possible.
You were a senator when the war began. Is it striking to you that 11 years later, now you're the governor, you're still welcoming home the bodies of soldiers being killed in Afghanistan?
Well, you know my position after growing up in the Vietnam era, very reluctant to get into long, long conflicts, and been pretty vocally in opposition to these unfortunate quagmires.
All right, our guest this week on Newsmakers is Governor Lincoln Chafee. Stay with us. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Newsmakers. I'm Tim White. Our guest this week is Governor Lincoln Chafee. To my right, WPRI.com reporter Ted Nesi and Eyewitness News analyst Arlene Violet. Ted.
Governor, I'd like to show our viewers a chart. I know it'll be a little hard to make out because we pulled it off my blog, but you can see there, the blue line is the number of Rhode Islanders in the workforce, the red line is the number employed since 2006, and you can see not only did we take a terrible tumble after the recession, but we're not recovering. That's up through January. We are still actually losing jobs to an extent. And, you know, I guess the question I come to is you see the nation beginning to recover slowly but surely. You see even Michigan, places very hard hit, and yet Rhode Island is actually almost decoupled. I mean, that must be very concerning to you. Do you think we need to take more radical steps? What's going on here?
Yes, that certainly is alarming to see the rest of the country improving and Rhode Island still stuck in a rut. And we're doing everything possible at taking what I say our assets and making them work for us, whether it's the 195 and growing the meds and the eds. I've been to Houston, I've been to Baltimore, I've been to Pittsburgh, learning from them what they're doing with their medical institutions, their educational institutions. That's where the growth is. And also looking at getting the runway lengthened, and so we can grow that asset of
these are very long-term projects, though. For an unemployed Rhode Islander
yes.
sitting at home, it's like, well, the runway will be done, and then maybe they'll, you know, it could be years down the road.
Everything's long-term, though. You just have to think long-term. On the good side, we work so hard on Department of Motor Vehicles to get the wait times down, and we're seeing them go back up. People are registering cars. All of a sudden, our wait times are back up at the DMV, and the volume has just increased from 18,000 to 23,000 in transactions. So people are out there buying cars.
And that helps unemployment how?
Well, the people are buying. This is the good side. Those numbers you showed are bad, but people are out there. They are spending. Those are the facts at DMV, and also our revenue at the state is trending. Sales tax revenue, income tax revenue. So those are good indicators.
Green shoots. Yeah.
But we still have this unemployment that is the top priority.
And describing his 25% on non-profits, Representative Calaval referred to it as bringing the Wizard of Oz out and put him in front of the curtain. Do you feel in a way that the Representative Calaval also is a wizard behind the curtain in the sense that he gets a tax-free pension? There have been efforts to try to do something about that, particularly if you're earning the same amount of money, notwithstanding what you're getting as a pension. Do you support that kind of pension reform? Should these disability pensions stop being tax-free at some point?
That's part of my legislative package, exactly.
And how's that going?
If you're able to work, instead of having a 66 2/3% disability pension, if you're able to work, then you get a 50% and we get you another job. Only 50% of the disability, we get you another job. That's part of my package.
How is that going? You also, again, same question, buttonholing legislators to say you've got to pass this.
Of course, Arlene. I've been a mayor, I've been a councilman, I've been a senator. I know how the process works. You want to get the ball into the end zone.
Yeah, but earlier when I asked you that question, you really haven't said that you are buttonholing individually.
Of course I am. What more could I say? We're meeting with the Senate President, the Speaker.
How many legislators have you met with on this issue?
It's constant. It's every day.
But ballpark, you can tell me you've spoken to 50, 60, 70,
yes, 100
legislators. Have you?
We're in the same building. We see each other Tuesday through Friday.
But you've talked to them is the question, not visually seeing them.
Governor, back to the disability pension question. You know, state firefighter lobbyist Paul Valletta called that aspect of your bill the most egregious. He told the Journal, and I'm quoting, "I'm tired of people minimizing our injuries. It's really an insult. Our jobs are different. We get hurt more." Respond to that.
Well, we have to work together and make sure we protect the safety of our public safety employees, but at the same time, some of these benefits are just unaffordable, and that's just the reality. And so there's an area where we can come together, protect the safety, make sure they have good pensions that they can live on, at the same time make them affordable, and that's our goal.
I want to read something you pledged on your campaign website in 2010 that people have noted to me. It's a quote here. Quote, "Make no mistake, I will oppose any changes to our taxes without first reforming our spending, particularly the mandates." And we've now had 2 budgets in a row where you propose significant tax increases. I know you've said why you think those were necessary, but isn't that breaking that campaign pledge?
No, the reforms are always part of any revenue package, and as a candidate I appeared before the Finance Committee urging reforms that now I have as part of my legislative package. So even as a candidate going up and urging reforms, Massachusetts called no revenue without reform when they put in their sales tax increase, and I feel the same way. We're not going to just throw money at a problem. We want to fix it structurally.
Let me go to then, Nick, if we could, a clip. This is House Minority Leader Brian Newberry. He was on the show last week, and he was trying to describe what he thinks is your fiscal philosophy. Let's listen to that.
Going back to when he was a U.S. Senator, if you look at his comments in the federal budget back then, his comments as a candidate and as governor, what he seems to do is whenever he sees a budget deficit, he says he's a fiscal conservative. To him, that means you raise taxes to close 50% and you cut spending to cut 50%. To me, when you see a budget deficit, it tells me you're spending too much money and you cut to get back down to what you have to be at.
What do you say to that?
Well, I think it was dishonest for the previous administration to say, we did not raise taxes. That was dishonest, because what they did is put the problem down to the property taxpayer, put it down to the cities and towns, say, you, Mayor Tavares, you, Mayor Abedigian, you go raise your property taxes, which is the most harmful tax, in my belief, of all of them, the property tax. And so it was very dishonest, and unfortunately, Representative Newberry didn't recognize that the problem was shifted to the cities and towns and to the property taxpayer.
But again, you're saying the previous administration, he tried to give them the tools.
Yeah,
to change
so
that.
the previous administration includes legislators and governor. It was a big mistake. It was wrong what they did.
Ernie Almonte.
And now we're paying the penalty.
Ernie Almonte says he's throwing his hat into the governor's race. Is he a high caliber candidate to run for governor?
I like to see candidates that have had experience as a councilman, as a state rep, as a state senator. That's what I like to see.
So you don't consider
He
his
hasn't
candidacy?
had that experience. Governor Kacheri didn't have that experience. And it made it difficult to really make progress in this state.
It wouldn't be a Newsmakers unless I asked a question about open records, and I should disclose that I'm involved with a group, New England First Amendment Coalition, that is trying to make changes here. The Attorney General, Peter Kilmartin, has a bill aimed at making Rhode Island more transparent, and there's another bill that groups support more strongly, and that's by Representative Michael Marcello. I'm curious if you had a chance to look at either of those bills, particularly the Attorney General's, because his seems to have the most juice, if you will, up on Smith Hill. Would you sign his bill if it were to get through the General Assembly?
I certainly have a priority of open government and transparency, but we're really focused on the cities and towns and some of the budget issues we have. I understand on these bills there's some practicality issues.
Like what?
What the departments, the mandates on the departments to monitor the bill, what happens, and how many employees we might have to add, and how we could best comply. So just practicality issues, but I can guarantee and promise that I'm in favor of anything that has transparency that's affordable.
Last night, Congressman Cicilline, thank you for attending a big fundraiser held for him in Providence. Mayor Tavares and Treasurer Mondo were there as well. And a lot of people are incredulous that all of you are supporting him, considering how much time you spend dealing with Providence's problems. Are you endorsing him for re-election?
Yes, I am.
And why have you decided to do that?
A lot of the criticism leveled against Congressman Cicilline as time as mayor, I think, is unfounded, because he suffered $30 million in cuts. And that's what we're talking about. No mayor could take $30 million in cuts just like that. No organization, Newsmakers or Channel 12 just couldn't take these kind of cuts.
No, that's
without,
my pay. Yeah.
without ramifications. And so I think some of the criticism's been unfair.
But a lot of the criticism isn't that he caused it. It's that he wasn't honest about it.
Yes, once you're running for office, you get focused on that. And that maybe there's some legitimate criticism there. Should have been more forthright in the devastation of these cuts. I would have preferred to hear, we just can't survive, but everybody was trying. Everybody knew the state was in trouble. Woonsocket, West Warwick, Central Falls. They took the weight of the cuts that came and tried to survive, and it just wasn't possible.
Deborah Gist's contract will come up during your administration. From what you've seen so far, will you be offering to renew her contract?
We're working well together, and good things are happening in education. We started out with some different philosophies, but we've come together, and she's written some good op-eds in favor of that collaboration, and it's been two sides coming together, so it's been very positive. Whenever that occurs, a new contract, we'll look at that time.
I'm curious about that with Commissioner Gist. There was a poll.
Things are good right now, though. We're
Well,
working
no,
well
and
together.
that's why I want to ask. There was a poll taken. She had very low favorability ratings with public school teachers. The unions took the poll, but it was Joe Fleming, who's our pollster, and I trust him. They supported you, and a lot of them expected you'd sort of clip her wings, the commissioner's wings, but you've wound up in some ways empowering empowering her. Why have you made that decision?
I think we've come together on various issues. I said a thoughtful pause on charter schools. We did do that. We've talked a lot about the wisdom of having charter schools go in that direction. I went with Commissioner Gist down to New Haven to see the Achievement First charter school down in Connecticut, toured it for the day, spent the day in the car with her and back, talking about educational issues. So it's a coming together and sharing of philosophies and making sure that Rhode Island has the best elementary and secondary education in the country.
In her?
Yes. Yeah, she's a hard worker and passionate, no doubt about that.
30 seconds, Governor. I have to ask you, as a former Republican, Mitt Romney looks to be heading in the right direction to be the nominee for president of his party, but it's not exactly been a love affair with the GOP. Why is that, do you think?
Well, it's the reason I left it, the party, is there's no room for Republicans, moderate Republicans like I have, which care about fiscal conservatism and not so much about the social issues. This Republican primary base, it's all about the social issues.
All right, Governor Lincoln Chafee, our guest this week on Newsmakers. I appreciate you joining us on the program. If you missed any of it, you can see it online, WPRI.com. For Arlene Violet and Ted Nesi, I'm Tim White. We'll see you next week on Newsmakers.